And what has happened? Here we see that there's this massive increase in what we call unfulfilled expectations. People expected after democracy that things were going to get massively better. But as we see on the top graph, according to their perceptions, it just didn't. And clearly what's happening is that unfulfilled expectations has increased dramatically. Are we surprised that we're seeing service delivery protests? Are we surprised that we're seeing student protests? There's actually some very nice work being done on the Arab Spring in Egypt, which showed a very similar process happening. This massive expansion in education, no increases in employment, leading to this massive expansion in unfulfilled expectations, which then spills over into social conflict. Right? So this is one of our first answers. We do think that social conflict, that economic imbalance leads to social conflict. But we've said the other side also, right? We've said that the social conflict, the laws that were created many years ago, they have contributed to the economic imbalance. So what I'm trying to say is that these two things really reinforce each other. It's a vicious circle. If we have this separation causing economic imbalance, causing more separation, causing more economic imbalance, we clearly need to do something about that. So what has the democratic government done in South Africa to try and address these? So in 1994, we had what we called the Reconstruction and Development Program. And as you can see, it's there to reconstruct what was broken down, okay? And to actually develop the economy. Now, the focus here was to have a developmental state, and the idea was to grow through redistribution. So the big focus, the most visible focus of this was, as I've suggested to you, the RDP houses, right? To provide proper housing for people so that they can have some form of respectable living. Okay? So this was actually quite successful, right? So there's been substantial strides in the provision of housing. And I'm going to show you later electrification, water provision. It's expanded dramatically. So these basic services for people to have a dignified life have really been established within the country. But people would argue that this has placed a big strain on the country's resources. Okay. Currently, if you listen to the budget speech last week, we have serious problems in this country in terms of our ability to expand these social programs. As I suggested to you, there's this trade-off between equity and efficiency. Efficiency says, can we afford it? Equity says, can we afford not to? Can we afford not to give people this basic level of living? You'll see that in 1996, there was a shift to what we call the Growth, Employment and Redistribution Program. So it's the shift away from growth through redistribution, but then saying poverty alleviation through growth. And it's this neoliberal policy that I was talking about. It suggests let's grow the pie so that the poor can also have more. But it suggests that let's grow the pie so that the rich can have more and that the poor can have more. Now, this policy was effective in terms of economic growth. It was not effective in terms of employment and redistribution. So in that sense, yes, the pie grew, but the pie wasn't equally shared because people couldn't get a job. And that's that figure that I showed to you. People of different generations were at this very low level of being able to find a job, and it just stayed that way. All right. We then moved on to the Accelerated and Shared Growth Initiative, where the focus was on jobs and skills development. Because I showed you that massive expansion in education, but it didn't get people into jobs. And the question is why? Okay, so there's this big debate on in South Africa at the moment around university education. And why? Because a university education is a really valuable thing in this country. The returns to, I'll call it the returns, it's like an investment because going into education is an investment. The returns to getting a tertiary degree in South Africa is among the highest in the world. So if you get a degree, the bump in pay that you get is one of the highest in the world as a percentage terms. So now everybody's like, yes, yes, let's get everybody into university. But the point is, as soon as you get everybody into university, that value of that degree will decline. It's a supply and demand effect. And why do I say this? Because we've seen it happen already with matriculation, with primary school education. So in some senses, what's happening is the economy is one step ahead of the education system. The economy is very skills hungry, but the education system isn't meeting those skills requirements. Even though skills are growing, it's not growing fast enough. We're also not growing the right type of skills. To tell you an anecdote, friends of ours, they live in the north of the country. He's an engineer, he runs his own company. He cannot find welders in South Africa. He's employing immigrants from Asia to weld and paying them lots of money. Right? One would think that it's not that difficult to create a skill like welding, which the economy requires. You don't need a university degree, which is, by the way, a very costly thing to generate for the government. Okay. But you can generate a skill that the economy needs with relative ease. Okay. So we need to change these mismatches and these ideas. We have this idea that a university degree is the only thing that'll get us out of poverty in South Africa. And that's not necessarily the truth. So we need to also work on perceptions. The latest installment of economic policy is the National Development Plan, which was in 2013. And here you'll see there's this important little thing at the end. It's not just economic, it's about social cohesion. And that's a primary policy objective of the National Development Plan, social cohesion, because there's this recognition that without social cohesion, any economic gains are not worth it, because they break down the fabric of economic progress. And similarly, that if we are going to have economic progress, it needs to be adequately distributed. So what happened to economic growth in the democratic era? This is just a graph over time. And we can see, well, things didn't go so bad. I said to you, the gear policy generated growth. Great. The pie got bigger. Okay, the pie got bigger until the financial crisis in 2008. We are in very low territory. Our growth rate is touching on zero. In other words, that pie is not growing in a time where we really need the pie to grow because we have very serious social problems to solve. Okay. And unfortunately, the prognosis is not very good either. Right? This came from the budget speech, and growth is predicted to be 1% 2017 to, right? Now, if you think that the growth, the gear policy, which I spoke of just now, suggested that we need to grow at 6% to halve unemployment. Okay. We're not close, right? We're not close. So we cannot expect our economy to just perform. We have problems, and to be frank, a lot of it is because of investor uncertainty based on our current political situation, due to state capture and all of these things. So it's social fragmentation that's causing our economy to suffer, which has consequences for the average person. Now, here is the shocking statistic. Our hands are slowly being cut off to try and solve these problems. So in the budget, the biggest item, we pay 10% of our budget, so the government's finances, goes just to pay off debts. Money that we owe bondholders in other countries. So it's not going to education, health, to improving the lives of people. It's just to pay off debts. Okay? And in actual fact, this is also the fastest growing item. It's growing with 10% every year. Now, if you see that our economy is growing at 10%, at 2%, 0 to 2%, our debt is growing by 10%. It's a serious issue. I don't know if you've ever seen that debt clock that they have for America. Okay, it's that it just rolls over in the trillions, right? We could very well be there. So in actual fact, South Africa owes other people half our economy. 50% of our economy is in debt. We need to realize that. Here we have an efficiency-equity trade-off, right? Because if we want to expand services to the poor, we need to spend money. If we want to spend money, we need to do it on debt because we don't have money anymore. Okay, we don't have money. We are in a serious trouble. Okay, so we had a presentation from National Treasury last week, and I could visibly see how their hearts were sinking. Usually they come with a positive outlook, but for the first time I could sense that they were not very positive about the outlook for the future. So we need to keep that in mind. So let's take that to social policy. The triple scourge. Okay, this triple scourge. The triple scourge of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Now, every single policy in South Africa takes these three things into account. Because these three things are unrelated. If you're unemployed, you're likely to live in poverty. If there's lots of poverty and lots of riches, there's going to be inequality. Okay, so these things feed into each other. Now, what has happened? And you might be surprised, poverty has declined in South Africa since the democratic transition. And it's declined in a big way. Okay. It doesn't always look like that to us, but poverty has declined in a very big way. Okay, I'll show you the figures just now. And why? Because of social grants, right? So South Africa has a very extensive social grant system. It's basically a monthly cash amount that goes to a household. We have what we call the child support grant. So if your household earns below a certain income, each child in that household is eligible for a grant of, I don't know what the new figures are, but it's in the region of 300 to 400 Rand a month, if I'm correct. So each child gets 300 to 400 Rand a month. You might think that's not enough to take people out of poverty. It has. Okay, it has. Okay. Then we have what we call the old age pension, which goes to people above the age of 60. Also among poorer households, it's more than 1,000 Rand a month. And this has also done massive strides to reduce poverty. Yes?
What's your opinion in, say, for instance, some of the social grants, not all of them?
Yeah.
Having a good intention,
yeah,
but actually adding to a social pressure. Because I've heard, for instance, and that's why I'm asking your opinion, people will now, just to get the social grant, have extra children.
Yeah.
Placing pressure on the social system.
Yeah. So it's the argument of, is it dependency or welfare enhancing? Okay, and there's two sides to the story. Okay, it really has been welfare enhancing. Okay, there is a lot of empirical evidence to suggest that the social grants have actually done a lot to promote also desirable behavior. Okay, so women who move into jobs. Why? Because the grant can be can be given to a grandmother who can do childcare, and women can migrate to cities to get into jobs. So it has had some positive effects. The evidence on pregnancy is debatable. Okay, some work which I did actually shows that social grants actually promoted people to plant more food in the ground. They could buy more seed, and they could work their plots. So it does have these effects, but I agree with you. What's the problem? At the end of March, the company that pays out these grants, their contract is expiring, and the minister doesn't have a plan. the Minister of Social Development. Now, if you want to see a social uprising at the end of next month, you'll see it visibly. Why? Because we have 17 million grants in South Africa that are paid out every month, on which people depend. And I say the word depend, because people depend on it. And the point is this is an experiment in our minds. We cannot withdraw that because we will see a social uprising. So yes, is this sustainable? I don't think so. Okay. Over the long run, you're right. We need this to move over into people moving away from a dependency on the state to create own opportunities. Yeah, I agree with you. It's not long run sustainable. South Africa's grant system is distinguished from other countries because ours is unconditional. It's just money. You can spend it as you like. In other countries, they say you have to visit a healthcare facility. Your children must be in school. If they're not, you don't get your money. Okay? So this is maybe something one should investigate. I'm not sure if the policy discussion is there. I need to check up on that. But I think that would be useful. So I agree. There are obviously examples where people misuse this. But overall, we do see positive effects, okay? But on the other side, I agree, we cannot sustain this. We cannot over the long run. Overall, the idea is that grants have done well, okay? But I don't think we have examples where grants have eventually led to a transition, okay? People have stayed in poverty, okay? So we need more broad evidence to suggest that grants actually allow people to transition out of that poverty permanently and without the grant. Yeah. So I haven't seen that happen. Yeah. So this is a danger. I think, as I suggested, we should have seen grants as some sort of impetus to get things going, but we aren't there yet. And I'm not sure whether we'll get there. So again, for me, it's always this social experiment in my mind. Not a social experiment, but this experiment in my mind. What's going to happen at the end of March if none of those grants can get paid out? Right.
Is it a cash problem? There's no money.
It's a contract problem. The contract has now been declared illegal and unconstitutional. And the Minister of Social Development doesn't have a new plan. She just wants to extend the contract. And the Minister of Finance has said no.
So they're just going to...
Who knows? I think this is part of a broader political battle also. Yeah. Yeah. So for me, that signifies to me the dependence of our economy on social grants. Yeah. And we do need to move beyond that, right? I think biblically, if we understand the theology of work, we were made to work, right? Not just to... So the grant should enable people to eventually transition into work.
That's another question that's in the back of my mind. I don't know if you're going to get to that.
Yeah.
You're going to get to that?
No.
Oh. No, I just want to...
We can talk about it.
Country, we've got all these factors, as you have mentioned, education, just the social setup, all of that. And what I was wondering is, what is the influence of belief systems directly on our economy and on politics?
Yeah.
What is the influence of animism, of a certain perception of Christianity, Catholicism? Jens mentioned yesterday, he was talking about Gnosticism.
Yeah.
You know, that's work in there. What is the influence of that? And is the role of the church actually much larger than we anticipate?
It is. Okay, and I'm going to give you two pointers here. Okay. The first pointer is Nicola, who's coming later today. She's done incredible work to show the Christian roots of economic development and democracy. and how Christianity really promotes it. Okay? It's clear as daylight, and particularly the Protestant version of it. There's extensive work. There's work also done to show even that today, areas that are close to mission stations still have better economic conditions. It's really the case. People still have better education. There's a very sad fact which the apartheid government did. They destroyed mission education in the homelands. That was one of the bases of social cohesion in South Africa, where to establish proper education in the apartheid homelands, they wiped it out. Okay, and that's these roles which we don't think are important, they're very important. Okay, they're very important, and the church plays a direct role. In terms of animism, there's very clear empirical evidence to suggest that countries with higher levels of animism have much lower levels of trust among each other. And South Africa stands out. Did you know that South Africa has some of the highest levels of animism in Africa?
You guys know what animism is?
Animism is where it's syncretism. You're a Christian.
Google that as well.
You're a Christian, but plus. So you add something to it. So you have a mediator. But Jesus isn't your mediator, but your ancestor might also be your mediator. And there's a very clear correlation between animism and the level of trust in a society. Trust is also highly correlated with economic well-being. Okay, so we as a church, yes, we have a role to speak out in terms of sound beliefs.